Okay. Hi, my name is Rose Catticle. I live in Canada. I'm going to be facilitating the session again with Luca. And just a little bit about Luca. He's been here before, but for those of you who don't know him, Luca Dellanna, he's a management advisor and he's the author of 11 books, the latest one being Winning Long-Term Games. For the last 11 years, he's helped organizations improve their management capabilities through training, workshops, executive coaching, and advisory. And he lives in Turin.
So one of the ways in which I define the work I do is that I give people better managers, in the sense that I train managers how to be better at what they do, which necessarily makes them better managers for the people. And one of the ways in which we make them better managers is that if they learn how to do their jobs properly, if they learn to see things from the point of view of their employees, then necessarily there will be less friction, interactions will be more constructive on one way, more effective, but also more peaceful. There will be less frustration. And so this answers basically Bessier's question in the sense that a lot of conflict, either like if we consider conflict in an organization as something like people discussing or hating each other almost, but also conflict in the sense of peace, like lack of peace in the sense of we need to work hard just to survive, or every meeting is boring, or discussions are going nowhere, and so on. Very often the bottleneck is a lack of learning. Learning soft skills such as delegating, running meetings effectively, and so on, but also learning things such as what doubts do people have, learning what problems do people have, learning what challenges they face, what objections they have to the fantastic idea that I have in my mind for the new project, and so on. And so I think that this is very important when we talk about learning. There are these two components: learning a skill, which could be a hard skill or a soft skill, but then there is also about learning the context in which we practice the skill, learning about the other people, learning when we practice the skill, what do people want? I make an example, like something that I do very tangentially. So maybe I only do once or twice a year. It's not the focus of my job. The focus of my job is training managers. But every now and then, I happen to train people on public speaking. And I always say, when we talk about public speaking, that there are two things you need to be good at. One is about speaking clearly, having an engaging body language, a good and clear tone of voice, good diction, and all these kind of things, which I would call like generic public speaking. And then the second thing which you need to learn to be a good public speaker is to learn about your audience. What questions do they have? What doubts? Sorry about that. I don't know how to move this. What doubts do they have? What objections? What concerns? When you finish your talk, what will they tell? What will they be able to remember? What they will tell to others that the talk was about? And if you don't know this part, so if you only nail the part about being very good at speaking, but you don't know what your audience needs, what they don't understand, and so on, you will still be a terrible public speaker. And I think that this applies to all parts of life. Like there is always one part which is about skills, learning skills, and the other part is about learning about our counterpart, how to interact with our counterpart. And so I think that yeah, this is a good start for today. Like this factor that we always need to learn about those two things. So if we are working, it's about learning. If we are delegating, it's about learning how our subordinate perceives the task that we are delegating, what bottlenecks they have, what doubts, what they don't know, what problems they will have when they start implementing the task. if we are learning any other skill, for example, if we are learning baking, now I don't know anything about baking, but I suppose that if we are learning about baking, there are two things we must learn. One is the cooking part, and the other thing, if we are not baking for just for our own consumption, it's learning about what do the people that will eat the bread like? What concerns do they have when I put my bread in front of them? What do they think about it? What assumptions are they making? What kind of bread would they like to eat? And so on. So yeah, just to start, I think this principle that learning is about two things. It's about the skill and it's about the audience for the skill. Any questions or feedback or any experience you want to share regarding this?
Thank you very much, Luca. I've trained insurance executives in Istanbul back in from 2009 up until 2012, and the ones that let's say the cohort that I've taught was very well integrated, and but then there was a group that was somewhat they just were not interested in getting the training that I was providing. But then in the event of crisis, cultural shocks, and this is a lot of the things that I taught them, they just toppled down. Then there was no remedy for them to adapt or, reorient themselves. And so I have seen, investing in oneself pay in unbelievable ways, because it's really about accepting other cultures, differences, approaches, and I have to have multitude of approaches on things. And so thank you very much. Very grateful, sir.
Thank you, Basia. Yeah, Tom?
Just, I love the way you framed, Luca, this dichotomy here, this two views or two facets. And it just helps me explain a little bit about some of the warm data practices that we have 2 weeks from now, that we're going to do a series of these, because it's a very different way of exploring that question of what's really going on the human side. We can easily do the epistemological side. We can ask people what they think rationally, but to help them connect and to actually, for us to learn what their self-experiences and their shared experiences is something that isn't, it's pretty unusual to have set up that type of situation. It's part of what you want to learn as a manager or a leader is what I'll call the landscape. I call the landscape of the people landscape that you're in, that you're part of, and that are with you there. So I just agree with you, and it helps me explain a little bit what these warm data sessions are, I think, in terms of learning.
Thank you, Tom.
And I must say, actually, just the introduction and the advisory you have provided is going to serve as a remedy to a colleague, because he's a high-ranking consultant, but he is in the middle of a conflict between his boss and another colleague, so they're really going at each other. So, and then he's kind of in the middle, but then so it's just going to provide a great remedy. So thank you for that as well, and I will share the recording and also your details.
Thank you, Basia.
Let me just toss in Tom's word warm reminded me that both aspects of learning, Luca, are subject to emotion, particularly to initially the learner, the person making the bread. His or her emotions are very much involved. But then as the bread is handed over to the audience, if you don't have an anticipation of the audience's emotions, we can say we'll have them, then you have to adjust very quickly to that. So you deliver the bread too late and they've already had their soup. And now you've got what Reza just mentioned, you have conflict. So it's really, to me, it's concrete. It's what you can picture in your mind about others, but always the emotions are going to be governing just how much you learn at any given time. I'm saying it like I know that, but do you agree or disagree? Emotions.
I agree with that. I think that emotions are super important because basically there are two things with that. So the first one is that we only learn when we want to learn.
That's right.
That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that we learn based on what we see or based on what we perceive. And if our emotions get in the way of that, in the sense that they lead us to interpret the reality of the world in a certain way, then we can only learn based on what we interpreted and not necessarily on what reality is. So this is important. And one applications in which I see that is that very often what I see in my work is that I get hired, for example, by the CEO or whatnot, to teach, to hold a workshop or to train a different group of people, which usually had bad experiences with external consultants.
Yes.
So it's very important that if this is the situation, I do not jump in directly in teaching mode, because if you jump in teaching mode without first having either the other person wants to learn or you establish trust, if there is at least one of those two components, then there won't be much learning. So the number one thing I should do in this case is to build trust. But key point is it shouldn't be trust that I am a nice person. It shouldn't be trust that that I can be your friend, because that's not the kind of trust that's required to learn. Because we all have a friend, I imagine, that we would gladly go out and drink beers with, but the moment that they start talking about, I don't know, politics or whatnot, we just switch off. Because while we trust them that they are good people, we do not trust that they have a good understanding of politics, for example.
Right.
So it's important that I build trust, but the type of trust that they trust that I'm competent and that they trust that I'm going to help them solve their problems. Not that I'm going to help them solve their boss's problem, but that I'm going to help them solve their problem, or at least that I will make their job easier. And so the number one thing that I should do in this case is to find what's the smallest piece of aha or advice I can give that will make a difference for them, but it's small enough that I can say it in 30 or 60 seconds so that they actually listen to me. Because usually you still get 30 or 60 seconds, even if they don't trust you. You get this 30 or 60 seconds, but you should jump straight to making a difference already. And in this case, usually it goes about experience, because like once you do this for a while, you kind of have a good idea of what's the one piece of thing that you can give them in 30, 60 seconds, which addresses a real need of them. Yeah.
Luca, when you were speaking, it reminds me, I can't find it. Someone posted this on LinkedIn. And we've all been there, when we were learning, we think about it as being in school or university, and we're in learning mode, right? But we're not working. Well, we might have part-time jobs, but I'm talking about full-time study. So that the connection between learning and working is already set for most people. And maybe it's changing now, but for those that have come up through the system in the last couple of years, it's like that. And then when you start working, you think, okay, I stopped learning. I'm just going to focus on working. And so what you've raised is a really important to know about this. Be aware of it goes back to it's the skill versus the context, and the example you just gave is a similar one.
Thank you, Rosa. And on this, I think you touched a really important point. The fact that most people at work, they are not in learning mode and they're not willing to go back to it. By this, I mean that there will always be a top 5 or 10% of the most ambitious people which are willing and even eager to go back to learning mode. And if your audience is those, then it's completely fine to go into teaching mode yourself and you tell them like, I don't know, here we're going to go to do a session and you will learn about this and that, and they will come and they will be eager to learn and so on. But for most people, if you already like the title of your session, of your workshop that you're doing with the employees or whatnot, is about learning something, that's not going to be extremely effective. So what I personally do is that in those cases, I frame it as a workshop in which we're going to address a very, very specific need and problem of theirs that they really feel like it's needed. And sometimes the workshop is really fully about that. And sometimes instead it's I don't know, 2 hours workshop or 3 hours workshop. And that thing, we only discuss it in the first 30 minutes and then we discuss other things. But it's really important that it's not framed as learning, which is something that often comes with negative connotations, because very often learning is boring. And instead we frame it as something like extremely actionable, outcome-oriented, practical and relevant outcome-oriented, and so on. Yeah.
It's ironic that we call a training session a workshop. To Rose's point, work is where an awful lot of learning is going on, or not going on. But I think if, with your point, getting to a real need, that need arose probably because of the work, the way people were working, things were, failing, or some connection between man and machine. But it grows as a problem that'll draw them into a learning mode. Ironically, because it comes from work. Let me just do a real quick contrast. Back when we were doing university education, we would create simulations of work. We call them exercises, and we'd put the learners in teams and say, solve this problem. But it was more rehearsal for the real world, where the problems are created mainly by humans as they're trying to get their work done. Workshop, shop work.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. And since you mentioned university, I have like my theory, like I also teach in university once a year, and I have my theory on what's the #1 differentiator between good teachers and bad teachers. Or better said, there are two differentiators. One is, of course, competence and whether they know about their field. But once you get a teacher which is competent about their field, I think that the main differentiator is whether when they speak during the lesson, they address the students as students, or whether they address them as if they were speaking to another academic teacher. Same example, when I'm in a consultant, is whether I am speaking to the person who hired me, or whether I'm speaking to the people who are the audience in my workshop. And if I speak to the person who hired me, even if sometimes it's not in the room, but there is this tendency, it will completely not resonate with my audience, and therefore it will be ineffective. David, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I agree with you. And it's very hard, particularly for the highly specialized researchers in universities to whom their research is everything, to stage down or over at least to actual learners in such a way that the learners will be interested in their theories. And that gap is something that's very troubling, because we have some brilliant people who just don't know how to do what you said. Almost like they need a person in between them, which is, true. Most of us teach someone else's theory, but someone to translate and warm, there's that word again, warm up the student learner, so that they're not scared by the preponderance of data and words that will come from a researcher.
Yeah, exactly. And on this, like to reconnect this on learning, like, what's the best way to deliver an engaging and effective presentation if you are not good at doing what you just if you are not good at delivering effective presentations or
That's-
effective lessons.
That's
For
right.
me, it's you frame the wall. The only thing that you do during the lesson is that you answer people's questions. If during the lesson you answer people's questions, it will be engaging, it will be relevant, and it will be useful. And if you instead try to go with your own outline, well, it will only work if you are very good at it and if you have done it multiple times and you can already anticipate the needs of the audience. So for example, something I do during the workshops very often is that I just pull questions from the audience. This way, it will go very, very relevant to their needs. And the same thing is if you are in learning mode, usually reading a book will only work to a certain point. And the reason why it will only work to a certain point is, again, because the book is speaking, but it doesn't know your questions, and therefore it can only be that relevant up to a certain point. Whereas if you're engaging with someone, with a trainer, a coach, a colleague, and so on, and you are leading with the questions, it will usually be a much more relevant conversation. Probably you will cover less ground, but you will cover it much, much more effectively.
And it will last after it's over.
Exactly. I think that this is the thing that most people miss, that when you teach, it doesn't matter what you say, it only matters what's retained. Which leads to a lot of interesting principles, such as if you need to write it down in the slides to remember it, your audience will not remember it either. Once you think about it, it's evident, and yet it's a mistake that we keep doing it. And that's why I always suggest people to, yes, you prepare, but then you don't write notes. Because if you need to write it down in notes, it means that you haven't distilled it to something that your people will, that your audience will remember.
That's right.
I'm really enjoying this. This is integrating a lot of different learning tracks for me. And I just wanted to mention that I think it was Dave in the conversation at the start of the call talking with Tom that compared the matching up of trying to remember what the topic was, but you were using the analogy of the DNA where there's the two strands, right? And you have these
learning and
leadership.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And that keeps kind of bouncing around for me as this discussion is going on around, Luca's point about you're coming to this context and there's all this other stuff going on, right? There's this task, but that's almost like a substrate. That's not the actual landscape. And you're coming in with all of your ideas about what your task is, but those have to, that you're looking for the connections between your ideas about what the task is and the reality of this strand of proteins or a strand of molecules that you haven't necessarily encountered before, right? A specific combination.
Well, maybe from a different perspective, it's weaving, getting a spiral, but thinking it was two kind of cables, but you're weaving as in the moment, extending and trying to get that as a tight weave between learning and doing, which is leading. And because we need to have an idea that the learner is instrumental in the weave. And what I heard Luca saying so far is if they're so far away from you that they're holding their learning strands against their chest and saying, you don't even care about me, let alone know me, then you can teach and talk and yak and show pictures, beautiful slides, and get your fee and leave. And then a week or two later, they say, what the hell did you do in there? Nothing. They're doing the managers are doing the same thing. So
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that too, because what comes up for me is the folding, like the protein folding when you're talking about a weave, right?
Yeah,
With
yeah.
the DNA and how, people that visual of folks are holding on to their strands, right? They're holding on to their yarn.
Mhm.
Versus, that vulnerability really that you're asking for and coming in, and you're really asking for people to open themselves up to being folded in different ways, to those things that they might hold on to expand and find other ways of being.
See, that was Luca's point of trust to me.
Yeah.
It's knowing, having taught management for many years and managers, among the people who most embattle when an organization's in the middle of change, and what organization isn't. To me, are the people who hold the responsibility of managing and the outcomes that they can not directly achieve. They have to do it through people. So they're on the edge of terror all the time. And so you get them in a workshop and they're dripping adrenaline, and they know the boss paid for this because the boss thinks that they need remediation.
Yeah, they're gonna fix us. Yeah.
And the next thing you know, so Luca, it's a heavy, heavy lift, isn't it? Even in the most pleasant places, to come in and do this in a real organization.
Yes, I think that Dave, you said something interesting when you said that the job of the manager is to do things through other people.
Yes.
I think it's very interesting because it's the same thing for the teacher. Like how good the teacher is not defined by how good he teaches. It's defined by how good the students improve after, in a way. And I think it's really important that we make this clear. I saw in the chat, Jen, what a very interesting question. But before we go into that, I just wanted to go back on something that Sam said, where he said something like about a misunderstanding of the task. So for those, I reconnect to something I said last time we met a few months ago. We were talking more, I believe, about delegation. And the things that I mentioned is the importance when you delegate a task to get the other person to rephrase their understanding of the task. If you do it, you will discover, I guarantee, that every time you delegate something, if you ask the other person to rephrase their understanding of what they've been delegating, you will discover either that they misunderstood something or that you forgot to mention something important all the time. And the same thing applies to teaching and learning. When you teach, a great thing to do is to stop in the middle of the lesson or of the workshop and asking a student to rephrase their understanding of the concept. Of course, not to put them on the spot, not to verify whether they were listening or not, but to surface the thing in which you have not been clear, and therefore there is a widespread misunderstanding in the whole class, even if no one is raising their hand and asking the question. Because 9 out of 10 questions, people will not voice their questions.
So Luca, your point there, I'm looking at what where is it, Kyle, and I'm gonna connect to what Sam said. You're holding on to your own strand, but Kyle wrote, most of your work comes from your identity, and more specialized you become, you think you're there, but until you're not, so that's that link to identity as well. And you're raising that the consultant and the client think or the staff person or the supervisor think they have been very clear because of their own knowledge, but they're not touching upon what they don't know.
Yeah, and building on Kyle's point, the problem with getting specialized, which is not a problem. Like, the thing is that getting too specialized becomes a problem usually only when you are not able to contextualize the thing that you are a specialist in. And by contextualizing, I mean, for example, let's say that that I am an expert in I don't know, a particular software tool. So contextualizing in that sense would be being able to explain what the software tool can do to someone in I don't know, in accounting versus someone in sales, or why should they care, or what's the implication of this part of the subject. So I think that that's the real important thing. If you're able to contextualize your specialization, you will probably be extremely relevant and in demand and so on. And if you are not able to contextualize your specialization, then it depends.
Am very much interested in the notion of learning when there's not an active directive teacher or teaching materials. I mean, you guys can see the chat, but I think especially as we think about how a lot of this intersects with you know, systems and complexity and all the other types of interesting notions that I'm sure everyone here likes to think about, it increasingly kind of dissolves the quote role of a teacher. And I don't mean just a human, you know, materials, anything material. So I'm just always so curious to hear other people's thoughts on this. That's all.
Thank you, Jen. Does anyone want to share their thoughts?
Yeah, I have it sounds like a cliche, but it's this: the moment creates the teacher, and it could be anyone, including the person who has the issue. But when there isn't a formal teacher or anyone or a manual or anything that can be grabbed to get you through, then hopefully there is at least another human who is comfortable in speculating with you what should be done. For a quick example, it's terribly unfortunate flooding that's happening in Europe, but also has happened here in our southern United States in the last few weeks. There's no teacher around when someone's house is floating down a stream or any of the other crises. And yet what we hear, maybe it's legend, is how people pull together and they start immediately solving problems. Later, an expert might come in and review it. But I have a very deep belief that there's a teacher in any of us, given the moment and given the willingness to share.
Tom, I think you raised your hand, or?
Yeah, I get just a couple thoughts. Part of, I think, what we've been hearing from Luca is that this role of teacher and learner is blurred for the teacher as well, because the teacher is actually learning in this process. What questions do people have? How is this landing with people? How are they processing it? So that's one perspective. The other, though, is you know, learning is not the learner is the learner, something that's happening all the time, or it has the potential of happening all the time. And Luke, I think, framed up people that feel ready to learn or are passive about learning. But I think that we're always learning. There's these three things I talk about a lot. So we're learning about things, you know, like Python and, you know, finance and things like that. That's the skill knowledge piece. But we're also learning about people, about what makes them tick, how to work with them, how they're responding, how they're motivated, and we're learning about the work. Right? Anybody who's had to accomplish anything knows that you have to figure out what your strategy is going to be, what your approach, what the elements are that you're going to create, what you know, what you don't know. If you know, loving the uncertainty, the complexity question about whether how much you know now versus what you have to learn as you go, right? So, you know, the idea of teaching and teaching well is valuable. I'm happy to hear about it. But there's also this: how do you learn well? How do you teach people how to learn? How do we teach ourselves how to learn?
Did you want to respond to that, Luca? I see that Gene also has his hand up. Or what did you want?
Yeah, so let's answer just briefly these Tom's questions on how do you learn well. So I have this, like, one question that I ask myself a lot is, well, of course you need to put some work into it, but there are people who put a lot of work and yet do not seem to improve much. And my question is why? And I believe there is this concept, which is that you only learn as much as the feedback you get. Not necessarily feedback from people, but also feedback from the environment. I make an example. Let's imagine that I'm trying to learn how to shoot a basketball. I take 10 shots, some go in, some go out. Then the question is, did I understand what I should do different? Did I understand what I'm doing right? Did I understand what I'm doing wrong? If you don't get this kind of feedback, not necessarily from a coach, in this case, maybe just by looking at where the ball goes, then you will not improve. You only improve as much as the feedback you get. And so there is this concept, which I believe is extremely important, that when you practice a skill, you should not only practice the skill, but you should also practice your practice. So practice the way in which you learn, which is a concept which I call meta practice. So this idea of practice your practice. So the meta practice is the idea of when you practice, when you try to learn, you ask yourself, how can I learn more? How can I get more signal, or how can I get more feedback? In the example of shooting the basketball, it could be something like, oh, maybe I need to hire a coach. Maybe I need to record myself. Maybe I need to try something different. For example, now I try shooting in a different way, and I deliberately try something different and compare the results. Something like that. But there has to be this attention, not just directed towards the skill, but directed towards the practice. Okay, sorry, let's
Jean
yeah?
and then Kyle.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
Jen put another comment. I don't know if we're following your format, Luca, but it's a good discussion.
Again, as I said before, the most important thing is to follow the questions from the audience, as long as they are relevant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Go ahead, Jean.
Imagine having a conversation with the most intelligent person that you could ever meet, who has the patience of a saint, never tires of your stupid questions, never becomes defensive. As of late, I've been having these 20 or 25-page Q&A sessions with one of the large language models. Pick any one, doesn't matter which one. Whatever topic comes to mind, I'll sit down and I'll say, let's have a chat about innovation. And 25 pages later, I take the whole conversation that we had and I stuff it into Notebook LM, and it creates me an audio podcast of 25 pages condensed into 10 minutes. And when I listen to it, I say, oh, I should ask this question, and this question. So I go back to the dialogue and ask some more questions. And it's really hard to sleep these days because it's just amazingly fascinating.
Thanks. Yeah, something Dave said earlier that I think ties back to what Jen's bringing up here around management having goals that depend on other people. And I have found again and again that when we build in those goals, people will ultimately resort to manipulation to get to those goals. And I've been in a lot of transformation projects over the decades now, and it's the learning is assimilation disguised as learning. It's the bus is moving, get on it or go find something else. It's all under duress. I've been in a few organizations that are interesting though, where they've been set up by not purposefully moving people from one place to another, but saying, here's the potential, here's the objective that we're trying to get to. We don't know if we'll be able to hit this. There's actually a good chance that we won't. We don't know how we're going to get there, but who wants to come? And what it attracts is a big variety of different backgrounds and experiences and professions into this space, but people that are inspired to get to that potential. And then that learning is it's just embedded, and that sharing of that information is just embedded as well. Whereas the transition of organizations to whether it's like, all right, we're not doing SQL anymore, we're doing Python, and that's how DAs are going to work anymore. It's ultimately we end up rebuilding that organization anyway because nobody wants to do that work. They're SQL pros. They want to go to a place where they're going to be valued as SQL pros, and then we just hire on, much younger Python programmers. It doesn't matter what it is. We're moving out of the Microsoft ecosystem into the Google ecosystem. It doesn't matter what it is. It's kicking and screaming every single time. But learning is always the sort of supposedly the fulcrum where that's supposed to happen. And I think it's disguised, just simulation. But I'm curious how important the self-organization is in this space. It's essentially what Jen's talking about, but a number of times that we try to do this under duress, just not working.
Luca, do you have
yeah, I just wanted to comment. I see Gina has again the hand raised, but just wanted to comment first on what Jean said. Like I've also been using a little bit on some topics like Claude, which is another AI model, to learn about it. And I found it quite effective, not because Claude is a particularly good teacher, it's not, but because it asks the questions that I want to ask. So if you manage to find a YouTube video or a book that covers exactly the topic I need, then that's probably going to be better because they are better communicators, and because the human element is always better. But the thing is that it's extremely hard to get the video or book that answers your questions. And instead, with those AI, you can ask the exact question and provide the exact context, and then you get an answer. And I think it's valuable. I think that it's not very good as the only source of learning, because every now and then they get the answer wrong, and you need to have some context and some information to know whether they answer the right thing or they're hallucinating. But I think it's an extremely powerful tool. So that was one thing. And then going to what Kyle said, Kyle mentioned the word embedded, this is another thing which is important. Like when I come in as an external to bring some competencies in an organization, necessarily we need to do it as a separate session because I'm only spending a few hours on site. When I advise managers on how to train their people, my number one advice is do not hold training session. So do not go into this mode in which people are sitting and listening, and you are teaching, and you are preparing an outline which takes time and is going to be irrelevant. Instead, just teach on the job as much as possible. Which means save the time that you're holding for workshops and spend it in time. Instead, go taking a task that is already happening anyway and comment, explain, work on that. And usually it's going to be extremely relevant. I make a concrete example to bring this idea better. I work with some the finance manager of a large pharmaceutical company that wanted to upskill his finance team. And the thing I told him is that he was telling me that every now and then he was holding training sessions, but they weren't very effective. And I am like, yeah, because training sessions are never very relevant, unless you are a pro teacher, which you are not because your job is different. And so what I instead advise is that every now and then, whenever he sees that there is either a task that the people are doing wrong or that they could do much better, he stops 1 second, gets everyone there on the task, so on that laptop, on their laptop, with the financial report open, and he explains what's the concrete problem here, what they should do different, how to correct that, and then explains the general principle and what they should do different. because there is this very concrete problem, and this very concrete solution is going to be 100% relevant. And because it's 100% relevant, it's going to be retained so much better. Yeah. So the idea is embed the teaching instead of keeping it in separate sessions. Okay, Jean, you're...
I used to read a lot, though I can't seem to stay focused anymore because everything connects to everything else, and I'll read the same paragraph 4 or 5 times, and each time I read it, I'm off on different tangents about things that are related. So in terms of something to support the ongoing conversations that I have with large language models, I decided that I ought to review the 100 best business books that have ever been written. And I'm putting them together in a place where it's easy to get to, and I've got about half of them done already, but it's easier because the LLMs are doing the reviews. And I just posted a link to it in case anybody wants to look at them. Within the next week or two, I'll have them all done.
So really interesting how everyone's approaching this, and it goes back to one of the comments, the follow-on comment that Jen made. Many of us might be in the business of conducting workshops. So how do you promote learning when perhaps we've been designing it in a very traditional, conventional way? And to your point, Luca, what's the need, and how do we kind of approach this differently, given that there's pressures from the client, pressures from the organization to do it in a more conventional way? Do you have any advice on that? I hope I captured it correctly, Jen. Okay, go ahead.
Well, about this point on pressure from the organization on doing things a certain way. So personally, I'm very lucky because people that contact me to work with them, they usually fund me to the books or to some other workshops, so they kind of already trust me, and I have kind of the trust capital to do things my way. But otherwise, what I suggest is frame the thing the normal way, and then you just go answering people's questions. That's to me the best compromise in a way. You just do within the walls and the boundaries that the client puts you and gives you. You then, as much as possible, frame it under questions or under very, very concrete problems that people are facing. So I make an example. Let's say that your company wants to touch topic X. So what I would tell people is, we need to talk about topic X. What's a moment over the last couple of weeks in which it became relevant to you? Or what's a problem that you're having in respect to topic X? And that's a great way to start a conversation that feels relevant. And because it's relevant, whatever messages or principles or ahas you pass, they're likely to be retained, and therefore it's likely to be effective. Tom?
Yeah, I'm thinking about Kyle's questions and comments, because I'll see if I'm getting this right, Kyle. It seems like that it's like there's this conflict between kind of conforming to a process, a fixed process, versus making that a learning and discovery or an adaptive type of process. So this is simplification. You could use Snowden on this thing, right? So what's being forced is a simple standard process, but the reality people are dealing with maybe is more alive or complex than that. And there's a disconnect between what people are being asked to do, which is a non-learning behavior, and what your experience is just means that that doesn't necessarily meet the moment. And so how do you learn what is really being asked, and how do you adopt the process? Am I getting this theme right for you?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I'm kind of doing some real gymnastics to avoid just saying safe to fail again. But I've I've seen in that assimilation I was talking about earlier, there being this conflict in not just the process itself, but the consequences that come from making mistakes. That there's a rigid measurement in performance without real good, I guess, process or instructions. It's not loading the bucket and carrying it to the next workstation. It's much more human interaction, or it's learning through something. It's usually analysis and problem solving. It's all the fuzzy stuff, and the coaching and the directive is just as fuzzy. Empathize, pick up on cues, those sort of things. And because the measurements are so rigid, they don't match the direction or the objectives. And so everybody wants something very rigid. Just give me the back of the Betty Crocker box so I can read the muffin mix. And I'll be able to accomplish that if you give me something very clear and simple. But if anything is ambiguous where I have to learn through it, I'm going to make mistakes, but I don't have permission to make mistakes, so I can't learn through it.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyle. I wanted to touch on one thing that you wrote in the chat, and in particular about mistake, failure, and learning, and safe to fail. Because I think that in some environments, there is this, especially when we think about, not about corporate, but more about ourselves learning as individuals, there is this idea that the more mistakes you make, the more you learn, which on one side it's true, but on the other side, it's also a dangerous it's also an inefficient and painful way to learn. And when it comes to others, especially, there is the chance, like the problem is that, well, they can do mistakes which might be problematic. And two, if they get too many failures, they lose engagement and they drop out. So the thing that you can do to preserve this element of you learn from mistakes, but without the negative side, is to do a lot of hypotheticals and role plays. As someone else now, I don't remember who, at some point he wrote in the chat about the training customer service teams. And one thing I do in these situations, it happened to me to train people who train customer service teams, is to train through hypotheticals and role play. So the idea is role play means I am the client, you are the customer service person, let's do the call as if it were true. And the call lasts 1, 2, 3 minutes, and then I give you some feedback. Much better because one, it's a safer environment for the person to fail, and two, because it's a safer environment for the company to fail. If the customer service guy does something wrong, you're not losing a client. Even better, faster, more efficient, and more directed is to do hypotheticals. Hypothetical means, what would you do if you have a client with this claim, for example? And then the other person says, I will do X, and then you tell them, good idea because, or bad idea because. Why is this effective? Because when you learn on the job, or when you learn on a role place, you will only learn about handling the most common interactions, which on one side is good because they make the most of the interactions, but on the other side it's bad because then you will not learn from the edge cases until the edge case comes and you will probably fail it. And instead with hypotheticals, if you do hypotheticals right, you literally have the possibility in 1 hour, you do 20, 30 hypotheticals, and you can pass years of experience in 1 hour. And that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, Luca, I'd like to make the connection of what you just said to James. He wrote, someone asked about, I think, was it Kyle or someone about, was it, yeah, Gene? I can't remember. Someone asked about learning, where is it win, Kyle, mistake for failure and mistake and learning. And so James talked about, for example, in the military security environment, there are techniques on James. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more about it, if you wish, where they do vulnerability assessments, gap assessments, a lot of scenario building, where it's really ruthless, you know, and I'm using his words. So you learn quickly. You have to learn quickly. You practice that learning quickly. Did you want to add anything, James, or did I summarize that? He's there. Okay. Sam.
I'm really appreciating the interaction between the things Kyle's bringing up and Luca's comments on it, because I think for me it teases at something that, or it helps crystallize something that I feel like I've been encountering a lot over the course of my career, and particularly like these tensions between what's really happening and the Luca called it like the limits, right, of what you've been given as your task, the boundaries that the person bringing you in to help has given you, and that sometimes we are given a job and there's a subtext there of, you know, these are people, and so they have their fears about failing. There's all this complexity going on, but then there's this, you know, you have your limits of the way that you are, the ways that are available to you. And even sometimes people come back to you and say, can you put limits on me, because this is difficult, right? It's difficult for me to encounter this without knowing exactly what I need to do, because the message that I'm getting, right, some signal that I'm getting is telling me this is one of these, I've got to get it right. And if I don't get it right, it's really bad. And so there's this kind of interplay there of, as an instructor or teacher, using the means that you have to see to approach the task, right? To encounter the other people in the room, the other people that you're interacting with. And it does limit you somewhat, but by keeping that context in play internally, even if you're not able to explore it in the business setting, allows you to watch for the things, right? To Luca's point when he's talking about earlier about doing trainings where you're putting yourself in a position to pay attention and to anticipate some of what's going to happen with this person, since you've gotten to know them a little bit or a lot, right? And allowing that to kind of integrate into your practice and your teaching. I don't know how rambly that came out, but that's what's coming up for me.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Luca.
Yeah, I wanted to address this, and in particular, so wait. Sorry, I wanted to get my dog because but he escaped. So I'm talking about my dog because sometimes I'm training him. And the thing is that when I'm training him, usually at the beginning he fails. Like he doesn't understand, or he does the thing wrong, and so on. And it's important to get always like to keep the engagement high and to make him understand that, yeah, that was a failure, but it was actually a progress on the right way, in a way. And so the same thing is, when people fail during the training, you want to make them, yes, you didn't get the thing right, but you made progress, that's good, that's what active learning looks like, and so on. Now, the tricky thing is that you must do it in a way that's sincere. And so first thing, you cannot do sincerely if they are learning on the job with a real situation. Because if they screw up with a client, it's extremely difficult to go to them with a smile and say that was a nice screw up, now you're closer to learning. Like that's just not sincere, and it's impossible to make it in a positive experience. Like it will feel bad. If you're doing it with an hypothetical, instead, it's much more likely to make it positive. How exactly do you make it positive? So the first thing is that you focus on the misunderstanding, but not on their misunderstanding. So you don't say things such as you missed this or you got this wrong, but rather things such as this is one thing that most people get wrong. And then you explain that. Or this is something that I also got wrong at the beginning. And you explain that. So you on one way, you take off the weight of the failure. And then you very quickly move on what's the best way. And then you try to, and then the focus is on now you have a tool you didn't have before, and that's why this is good. And I know that it kind of feels a bit abstract, but when you're doing, if you manage to do it, like it becomes evident. So it's this idea, you play the hypothetical, you ask them what they would do in a situation, they get it wrong, and you first mention that what is wrong, but in a way that it doesn't put the burden on them. So for example, this is something I also got wrong in the past. This is what I didn't know. So it's not a mistake. It's because you're bad. It's a mistake because you missed something. You didn't know sorry, not because you missed something, but because you didn't know something or you didn't notice something. And then you immediately switch to the right thing to do. So this is one key component.
Yeah. We have Basir and then Mary.
I just wanted, before that, I just wanted to go into the chat. There is Tom that asked what are good ways to create the hypotheticals. And I don't know about any good method that works perfectly out of the box, other than you having experience either with the subject at hand, so you know what are the common risks, what are the common things that might go wrong, or not common, but what are the things that might go wrong in general, common and uncommon ones. That's the first thing. Or you have some experience teaching, and then you know what are the things that students tend to get wrong. And I don't know that there is a method that works out of the box other than just you developing some experience in one of those two topics.
I immediately thought of Gene and wondered whether or not his AI generator would come up with a set of hypotheticals for each of those books that he.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Tom, the thing is, there is no user's guide. It's sort of go interact with it and do a lot of trial and learning and figure out what you can figure out what to do with it.
I mentioned on the military security law enforcement vulnerability assessment and lessons learned, this is something that I've put in, and it's all about connecting the dots. I mean, this is something that I've learned way back in the early 2000s, and I have a question for Luca in this regard. So the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know. Usually when I train, I would say, it's really now these days, you really have to know about the devil you don't know as opposed to the devil you know. So when I say this, the devil that you don't know, when you go to an audience, how do you uncover? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Basir. So I think that one thing, to be honest, and this is a bit opinionated, and I don't expect everyone to agree, but I believe that uncovering is a tiny bit overrated, as opposed to putting the burden on the teacher to know what are the base rates of what their audience tends not to know. Don't get me wrong, you can have a very interesting conversations about uncovering and pulling from students what they might not know. Yet, I still think that it won't be sufficient, and there also has to be the part that comes from the teacher, knowing. And again, it's something that sadly, it is very difficult to do the first time that you teach a subject or that you work in a subject, because it just requires a bit of experience of having done it, and then you have the personal data set to do it. Unless you ask other people who've been teaching or working in this for a long time, and you ask them, what's the likely things what are the common things that students don't know they don't know, for example. Yeah. Thank
Very
you,
much,
Bess.
Luca.
Mary?
Hi, everyone. I wanted to share a couple of experiences that I've been having lately. I was a few minutes late, so I'm not sure if this has been covered, but there are things that are important to me that I haven't heard yet. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about this certification program that I'm in right now that I think is absolutely fantastic. I can't even tell you how thrilled I am about it. A couple of things that I have found a lot of value in terms of how this has been structured. It's a cohort-based group, and it's over time. So I'm learning not only from my instructor, but from the 12 other people in my cohort. And I find that shared experience as well as elevating the overall knowledge really, really important to me. So 1 week, our instructor provides information. We have an assignment, we get to write a paragraph or something silly about it, which also is a good part for me in terms of learning to like restate what it is the topic was about. And then the next week we get together in small groups of 3 and we all practice. And part of the practice is that there is a teacher, there is a student, for example, and then there's an observer. And we all have the responsibility of practicing, trying something, taking that risk. Everybody gets nervous, but we also all have the responsibility of evaluating each other. And I love that because I feel like we are all getting better at teaching one another versus having the burden on the instructor. So I spend much more time with my colleagues and independent like coaches than I do with my instructor. But I feel like that has been super helpful in terms of not only knowing things, like my assessment of myself is that I know a lot, having been in this course and doing some things. But one of the things I really value is that I am very clear now what I don't know. Or maybe it's really the distinction that there's a lot that I know, but there's not a lot that I'm good at yet. So like distinguishing what I know versus what I have built the skills to be able to do very effectively has allowed me to be independent in doing my own assessment of where I want to grow. And I think that sort of cyclical thing of like, or maybe challenging who really is the teacher and who really does make the evaluation, and how do we translate the knowledge into the behaviors that need to happen consistently to actually perfect it in life or whatever your task is. So I kind of wanted to share a couple of those things that are striking me that I haven't heard yet here. And the other thing that I'm not sure this has come up yet, but I wanted to just say is that I think there are differences in if you're learning a skill or if you're learning a knowledge, learning something that you need to know in your head. So coming from big pharma, I have spent the last 10 years doing a lot of instructions so that I know what the safety protocols are in terms of business or whatever, but it's like a check the box activity. And it's important for the organization, but it's very different than learning a new skill or learning a technical skill. And I think that there isn't a one size fits all, which we've been talking about, but sometimes for me, just making those distinctions to learn from each, what's necessary for each is important. So a lot of words, but I wanted to share that, and I'm really appreciating the conversation.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Luca?
I think that you hit what for me is the most important part about cohort-based, which is whether the students are only invited to discuss or whether they're also invited to teach and evaluate each other. Because personally, like I think that a lot is left on the table if the students are only invited to discuss, especially when the discussion is a bit free and not particularly directed. And instead, I think that the cohorts really shine when you have this more active and differentiated part in which sometimes you're practicing and sometimes you're teaching or evaluating. And this alternation produces excellent, tends to produce good results. Yeah. Thank you.
So Darren had a question, which I thought it kind of touches on, as individuals, we learn differently. And so what we've discussed here, there's different approaches. but it might not, and it goes back to what Mary was saying, it's not a one size fits all. So what would be the challenge in learning with this learning approach that you've, or the points that you've expressed, Luca, when, I'm a visual learner, someone else might be an audio learner. Any insights on that?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. I think that on this, like, something that helps is either like if you have the possibility to like match the students together so that you can have a more visual group in which you teach a certain way, and the more like so that you can teach appropriate to each student's way. And on the other hand, I think that it's very important that you find a teacher that teaches in a way that works for you. So I think there is this. That said, I think that when we talk about individuality of the students, I think that we always talk about the learning style, which is good, but I think that we don't talk much about the present skill level. And this is extremely important because if you get into a class where people have different current levels of understanding and practice of the topic at hand, it would be very difficult to teach in a way that's relevant to all of them. And either you will teach aiming at the better half, like at the more competent half, and you will leave a lot of people behind, not because they're stupid, but simply because if you're teaching at a level that they don't fully understand, they will not understand the patterns in what you're saying, and they will not be able to learn about it. Like, let me make a very simple example. Imagine that I'm teaching soccer or basketball, and the people in front of me, some of them know the rules and some of them don't. Then I have a problem. Either I go back teaching the rules, and then half of the students will get bored, or I start assuming that people know the rules, but then I will start saying things that sound completely incomprehensible to the half who doesn't know the rule, and because it sounds incomprehensible, they will not be able to learn from it. So I think that it's extremely important, if possible, to separate the classes or the groups of students into levels, or take the time before to bring some people up to speed and then to teach. So I think that there is also this part which is important about individuals, about knowing their current level. Because the problem is that a lot of times people will not mention it to you. Because if you see it from the point of view of the person who is a little bit behind at the moment, you see half of the class in front next to you that keeps nodding and keeps asking questions which are relevant, and you feel bad. You feel like it's your responsibility that you are not up to speed, whereas really it's not. It's the teacher's responsibility. But then the teacher doesn't know it, and then the divide will just keep growing. Yeah. Dave?
I want to roll back to the word evaluation, because whenever I'm in a conference with fellow teachers, professors, we all shudder at the responsibility of grading the work. And I think we would all agree that if we could remove us being the arbiter of the final grade and the deliverer of the message that you have a D and you have an A, we'd be much more free to engage in the learning and co-inquiry that we'd love to do. So is there a way that we can use the word evaluation so that it doesn't instantly raise the prospect of judgment or the possible shame or other emotions that really do block people from going ahead?
Thank you, Dave. I think that it's really important to frame evaluation, because usually evaluation is framed in the way of we're evaluating the student and it has downsides. Whereas what you want to do is to evaluate the skill, not to grade the student, but so that the students know what to improve next.
Yes.
I think that this is the very important thing. So for example, I make an example, and let's say that I'm being evaluated on basketball. If you tell me that I got a C grade in basketball, that's not useful.
No.
If I know that I'm going to get evaluated on basketball, that's scary. Conversely, if you tell me that, I don't know, my defense is a B and my shot is a D and my movement is a C, then it's much more useful. Why? Because I know what I'm doing well. So the first thing is that the more granular the evaluation, the more likely that you can find things in which even a bad student is good. Which not only is good from a morale standpoint, but it also makes you feel much more appear much more reasonable to the student. Because if the student doesn't think that they're doing something well, and they don't see that you pick up that they're doing something well, they will think that you are arbitrary, stupid, don't care, or whatnot.
Right.
So this is one thing, one point. And yeah, thank you, Bye. I'm seeing that there are a few people leaving. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And then the second thing is, if you're giving me like granular grades and you're not grading me, but you're grading my skills, then I know how to improve, kind of. I know what to improve, kind of. Even better is if together with the grade, there is the actionable thing on which I can improve, which is, for example, it shouldn't be like your shot is a C, but it should be something like your shot is a C because you're still shooting with the forearm bend, and you should practice shooting with the forearm straight. If you say that, it doesn't feel demoralizing. Almost. It still feels maybe 10-20% demoralizing, but it's a completely different thing from the other way of grading.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, thank you, Dave.
Luca, a few points. I'm just trying to tie their common themes. James and Tom talked about, I think it was the reaction to what you were saying about learning styles. Learning from the bench as opposed to learning in the swimming, for example, you're in the water, or learning in the wild versus learning in the lab. And so this notion of we all come from different backgrounds, we have different ways of learning. In an organization where you perhaps don't have the opportunity to what you were talking about, separate those that learn in a certain way versus others, you have this mixed kind of group. How can you facilitate a good learning, and also learning fast? That was one of the other themes that you brought up earlier. So I'm not sure if you have some insights into that.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. I think that what's extremely important when you have this kind of heterogeneous audiences is to always bounce back between levels at which you're answering the question. So let's say that someone asks me a more advanced question. I will go back into first explaining why the question is important in a language that is understandable to someone, to the lowest level people in the audience. And then maybe I would answer the advanced question, let's say, and then I would rephrase my advanced answer in a more basic way. For example, so let's imagine, for example, that I'm teaching a cooking class, and someone asks me, I'm talking about how to cook fish, and someone asked me a very advanced question on how to remove scales from the fish. So what I would do is that I would first explain why that question is important. And for example, I would say like, oh, John just asked this question because he wants to learn how you can descale the fish in a way in which you don't create too much waste of good meat, because if you're running a restaurant, that will impact a lot the profits if you cannot get much meat out of the fish. Then I would answer the very specific question which was asked. So for example, on the scaling technique, and then I would repeat a watered down answer at a much more basic level in 2 or 3 sentences in 10% of the time. For example, I would say something like, long story short, make sure that you keep the direction of the blade as parallel as possible to the scales, for example. Now, I know nothing about cooking, and maybe my answer was completely wrong, but you get the point. So you answer first why the question is important, then the advanced answer, and then the basic summary of the answer.
We have 25 minutes left. So Luca, I don't know what you want to do. Tom, we could do a breakout, but we're kind of small now. So maybe just more questions. Is there anything you didn't cover, Luca, that, I know you've got a lot of questions today. Is there something you want to share with us?
Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about is the importance of like what I call teachable moments, which it's a word that I use in 2 ways. So the first way in which I use it is when, especially this work, especially at work, but no, actually it works in all kinds of conditions, is when you notice a mistake, someone doing something wrong, we jump straight into correcting the mistake. I make an example. I see someone, let's say that I work in finance. I see someone making a mistake on their Excel spreadsheet. And very easy, the temptation to just jump in, take the mouse, correct the mistake yourself, or just tell them, you got that cell wrong, it should be the sum of this and that, and that's it. Problem is that it's not a teachable moment in the sense that they didn't understand what they got wrong, they didn't understand why it matters, and even if they did, they might not remember it the next time. Teachable moment instead means that you take that moment and you make it a moment in which you actually teach something, which means you go back into what I was said when I was talking about scaling the fish. You explain why it's important, you teach the correct way of doing it, and then you reteach a very condensed way of what you just said, but just a second time to make it sure that they remember. This is one way. And then the other way in which I use the word teachable moment is, as much as possible, when you are teaching competencies, do not teach abstract concepts, but rather moments in which someone actually practiced that. A moment in which someone got something wrong, and then you taught them or they learned the right way of doing it. So you can use a lot of examples. You can tell stories such as that time in which you made that mistake, or stories about that time that another student of yours made this mistake. And then, of course, like what's the principle and what they did and how their life improved afterward. Dave?
Yeah, I think we just came back to the beginning and started to talk about leadership, because I think what you just described very well in that moment is an act of leadership. In this regard, not only are you there to help with the task and doing it right the next time, but you've taken into consideration the well-being of the individual, the well-being of the team, and you've also brought in the implications of if that mistake were to go forward and compound other problems. And I think those who work closely with the people who are doing this critical performance may or may not be called teacher or leader. They may be called supervisor, they may be called coach, they may be called team lead. But I think now we're talking about managing education again, managing the people who manage. Would you agree that teachable moments are an awfully big part of a day of managing?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that this is important because one, they should be a part of the manager's job, meaning that the
Yes.
manager's job is to teach. And if you as a manager, you don't have at least 2 or 3 teachable moments every day, then it means that you are probably underdoing it.
Yes.
And the second thing is because it's the most time efficient way to teach. Like the problem when you tell managers that they should train their people, one of the common objections is I don't have the time. What they mean when they say I don't have the time, they mean my schedule is too busy and I don't have a slot where I can put 1 hour of training. But they can always fit some teachable moments in activities that were happening anyway. And so that's a great way of doing it organically. And then the other thing, Dave, you mentioned engagement and well-being. And especially about well-being, like one way in which sometimes a metaphor that I use with some managers is, I don't know if you've ever played a video game. In plenty of video games, characters have a health bar here.
Yeah.
And when you shoot at them or when you hit them, the health bar becomes smaller. And when it's 0, they die. And you go around in the video game and you always see this health bar. And what I tell managers to do is to imagine all of their employees with an engagement bar. Well, engagement is whether they listen to you, whether they show up at work engaged, they're proactive, they're willing to do things, and so on. And what happens is that there are events over the day which decrease the bar because they get frustrated, because you talk to them for too long, you talk to them in a way that's too paternalistic, because they made a mistake and you make it weigh on them too much and whatnot. You give them negative feedback in a way in which they think they don't really deserve it, and so on, and the bar keeps getting low. And if it goes to 0, they disengage. And if they disengage, it will be much harder for you to re-engage them. And so what I tell them is to always look at that bar and try to keep it as full as possible. Of course, every now and then they will have to do something which decreases it, but the important thing is to always keep it in mind, to know that if you decrease it, you want to decrease it a little, not too much, and so on, these kind of things. And it's especially important during teaching. Also, the idea of attention span. When you teach, people have this much engagement bar. It's already only at 50% because no one shows up to class except the very top students with the engagement bar full. And so there is only that much that you can use, that you can consume the attention. And instead, what you should do is to reward that attention rather than consuming it. You should build up that attention bar, that engagement bar. And I think it's a very useful metaphor.
Might I add just one embellishment? I think that the manager or the helper, however, should have their own engagement bar, because we're looking at engage, which means 2 or more people. And I think what sometimes happens, people are acutely interested in, is this person who is now acting like he or she wants to help me really engaged? Or are they going through some kind of motion, or are they too tired or something, so that their engagement bar is lower and the other was higher, but now the higher one says, oh, I'm going to adjust my engagement to the teacher or to the manager. And so you have some 0 game. And this, I'm pretty sure, happens all the time. So when we're preparing people to manage and lead, perhaps we also have to help them be very emotionally intelligent in order to get through the day.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And these are like, I want to bring it one step further, what you mentioned, that like also the leader has this engagement bar. Like another thing you want to be conscious of is that you as a leader, as a teacher, or as a manager, you have a trust bar. Trust, which represents the trust that people have in you. Again, not trust that you are a good person, but trust that if they listen to you, that it's worth listening to you, that it's worth taking you seriously. And the interesting thing is that during your day as a manager, there are plenty of actions which might decrease or increase that. For example, if you waste your people's time with an unnecessary meeting, the trust that they have in you will decrease. Again, it's not trust that Luca is a good person, but it's trust that if Luca says something, we should listen to him. Another thing is if I say that there is a deadline and then I don't follow up on that, that decreases the trust bar. Why? Because I said that something is important, that something needs to be done by the 1st of December, then the 1st of December comes, I don't check about it. For people, it means that the next time I say that something needs to be done by the date, they shouldn't trust me. And so that shrinks the bar. And then if your trust bar is too low, then of course people will not take you serious. And if people don't take you seriously, it would be so much harder to do your job.
Okay, Tom has a question.
Yeah.
Let's comment. It's really just reinforcing, I think, what we've already heard, and it comes from in my coaching experience, it almost often comes up that people have an employee or a coworker or a resource they're depending on, and it's not working out, so they want to feel better and more confident about how to give feedback. And so I will give them a couple examples of typical simple feedback formulas, because I just want to keep the frame simple. It's really the content, not the mechanics, right? But I also tell them that, in the material that you find online, for example, that I'd share with them, it almost universally gives examples about correcting problems, performance problems, as feedback examples. And I tell them that this is wrong-headed. Because feedback these models should be used for positive feedback, and the same model, and they could also be used for communicating. People are concerned about executive presence and communication it's a simple way to communicate. And one of the ones I say that I like the best is called the coin model. It's really simple. It's just, in this context, in this situation, here's what the observations are, here's the impact or implications of them, and here's what to do next. And so you can use that in communicating just about anything in the organization very simply and very clearly, but also, helping people to gain their confidence, to build momentum in their own performance, to go from being tentative to being secure requires positive feedback and helping them to see the impact and the outcomes of their work. So yeah, I'll just share. Same thing that you guys said, just another perspective on it.
Thank you, Tom. I think it's very important also this focus on positive feedback. Like, you need to let people know that so first of all, sometimes people don't know how good some behaviors of theirs is or how important it is, and so you need to enforce it. And then the second thing is that you need to enforce the good that people do, because otherwise they think that their efforts are going to waste. And that decreases that engagement bar. Every time I do something, I put some efforts into something, and then it didn't matter, my engagement bar decreases. And so we need to use positive feedback to let people know that what they did matter.
And even in positive feedback as well, you're not giving approval, you're not being paternalistic, you're simply making the observation and helping them to appreciate what the reality of that is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Dave?
Well, I think, yeah, I'm on mute. The benefit in what we were just saying is that there's work. That's not always true in a classroom, training lab, or anywhere else, unless it's simulated, but real work with real outcomes. So what you're really able to do is let the work say what it needs. The future work, what's next? What do we not know about the work we're doing? And then it's common cause. You're not serving each other, you're serving the work. And most places I know, that's very important. Let's say an operating room with surgeons and nurses and others in the room. The work itself becomes the reason that this parity and equity right away. If someone can see a better way forward, and that's the key word, they'll do it. So, Luca, what do you think about the mix of teaching, learning, and work?
I think that it's very important to have a balance on this. Like you mentioned, like there has to be the teaching, there has to be the learning. Like moving back to the first thing we covered today, which was the idea that the teacher needs to learn from the students what doubts they have, and otherwise it won't work. And then there has to be this work, which is both the practice, or anyway the active learning, and then it's also the work, as in like this focus as why are we doing this? Why are we learning this? And the fact that, of course, the point is never the procedure of the piece of knowledge, but the point is always what the procedure of the piece of knowledge is for. What outcome we're trying to achieve, which is extremely important. Like you brought this good example about surgeries. It's less evident in other places at work, and I think it's really important. And not only to, like, sometimes I see managers who understand the importance of explaining why this is for. However, they explain it in a way that makes sense from the company point of view or from their point of view, but they fail to explain it from the worker's point of view, which instead is the point of view that matters. So why are you doing it, and why it is good for you to doing it this way? I think that's extremely important. Like, you know, there is this story, I don't know if it's real or apocryphal, about the President Kennedy and the janitor at the NASA agency. And the story, which is told in a lot of business magazines, is that President Kennedy visits NASA and he sees the janitor and asks the janitor what his job is, and the janitor answers, I'm helping sending rockets to the moon or something like that. And I hate this story. And the reason I hate it is because that story gave origin to a lot of managers who think that the way you discuss purpose is by going to the janitors and telling them that their purpose is the same purpose as the company, which is in this case to send rockets to the moon, which is absolute nonsense. That's cringe, and my number one rule is don't do things that are cringe. And instead, what the purpose of the janitor is, of course, to keep the place clean. And if you want to bring it to a higher level, the purpose of the janitor is to provide an environment which is conducive for the rest of the team, for the rest of the company. And this is what the purpose is. And this is what you should give feedback. And this is what you should go to the janitor, say, not thank you because you're helping us shipping rockets, which again, it's nonsense, but thank you because you're keeping the place clean and this is important to us and you're helping everyone else do their job better. And this is much more relevant. And I think it's the way in which we should explain the purpose of procedures, the purpose of lessons, and so on.
So, Luca, excellent session.
Thank you.
We have about 6 minutes left. Maybe we could do a round if you wish to share one thing or two things, recognizing we have 6 minutes left and we have a few people left here, what you learned from today's session. So I can, if someone wants to go first, please raise your hand or I'll just call out. If you don't wish to share verbally, you can certainly put it in the chat. Okay, how about Sam? Oh, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, this is I'm still digesting, but there's a lot here that's crystallizing for me around even some of the stuff that I think the thing that stands out the most is the theme of it being about the work and the interplay between really understanding that people are complex and they can be coming at this from a bunch of different ways and honoring that by respecting the container that you're in, right? Whatever the environment is, the business, whatever, and kind of using that work to it being about the work and about what the task at hand is, and sort of honoring the dignity of the person that's coming to this task with the intention to, you know, participate somehow. I feel like there's a lot there in that tension, and so this is giving me some context to work from there.
Good, nice, Sam. Basir, anything different to share?
I fully agree and second, but most important of all, it was truly an awakening that this is really a craft, and the fragility, responsibility, and the integrity we should carry in the work that we are doing. So thank you very much, Luca, and everyone. So Luca has basically opened up a new century for me on today's session and everyone else, and I am saying it as an ultra critical person, and also your wonderful, kind moderation. But that's all I mean, I'm still processing. I watched the recording several times. Thank you.
Okay. Darren, did you wish to share something or put it in the chat? Okay, I believe you're digesting as well. Dave?
Yeah, I want to first say that my engagement bar is very wide, and here it is. You know, how long has it been? I just looked up and said, "My God, we've been at this a long while," and that's not typical. We tend to now want to have everything happen in 15 minutes or less. So I congratulate Luca on that. My learning bar is also quite there, because I thought I pretty much knew anything at my age. I'm into my 80s, and I've done this work for 60 years. And yet here I am just clicking on not so much new terms, but new combinations of how to look at this exquisitely important role that we play when we're helping other people become better managerial leaders. And so thank you very much and Tom and Rose for putting together this session.
Thank you, Dave. Tom?
Yeah, in learning, when you're learning, you're in that space where you're putting things together and you're processing. And so sometimes you can't quite connect some of those dots. So staying with some of those new ways to appreciate something, and then the risk of saying it out loud. But I'll just say the impression that I come away with today is, you know, the independent variable is the work we're all doing together when you're in an organization. But in the simultaneous equation, the other factors include, you know, learning and knowledge building and skill sharing. But that is it's not a performative experience when it's done best. It is a relationship. It is a collaborative learning about what's going on, what do we want to do, and also I guess I just appreciate that. And I'll use my coin example again, my coin model, because I think it fits with the janitor story, but it also fits with what I just said. I said, in this context, this is what's going on. If you're a janitor, you're cleaning the floors and the handles, and the impact of that is the environment it creates for the people that are creating the rockets, right? And the next thing is to maybe just appreciate that. You don't have to have improvement, or to understand that people notice what's going on. So I love that easy, simple, interpersonal way of looking at it.
Yeah. So thank you, Luca. What I appreciated, because we had structured this in a very different way, and what I learned is you went to where we were, and that you practice what you're preaching. So it was brilliant. So thank you again for all your insights. Thank you everyone for your participation, and there will be a recording. Tom will have that up in a few weeks. And Tom, Luca, any last words?
No, just thank you everyone for contributing. Thank you, Rose, for moderating, and thank you, Tom, for inviting me.